Jeez. How many times do I have to do this? It's not even difficult or particularly engaging. I'm just reacting to incredibly slow moves and pressing 2 buttons. Is this really any better than games from 30 years ago? First off, I want to say thanks to everyone who watched my Silent Hill F video. You guys are awesome. Secondly, some of you have the reading comprehension of a ceiling fan and you can't be saved. The majority of you are geniuses who can watch a video and formulate your own opinions. But some of these Silent Hill fans would type in an argument and act as if I was the one who made the argument. I wrote the script, guys. I know what I said and didn't say. That video wasn't even about combat in the first place. It was about how their presentations of the game didn't focus on anything that served to promote and induce fear. You know, the entire point of a horror game. I'll address and reiterate it for the Downpour fans in the back, and then we can move on. I don't care if a character has access to bazookas, lightsabers, or can do a fucking Showtime Pettis UFC kick in slow-mo. As long as the game is scary, all of these things can be forgiven and might even become iconic, like with Leon in Resident Evil 4. There. Are we all caught up and understood? Cool. This video is specifically about combat and how horror games are walking a fine line whenever it's introduced as a mechanic. I want you to think about fear as a meter that is filled by various things in a game. Solid atmosphere, a good chunk of fear is added to the meter. Abstract and implicit events that mess with you, another good chunk of fear is added to the meter. An awesome soundtrack with tons of interestingly terrifying visuals, great addition to the meter. But what about engaging gameplay? What does it even mean for a game to have engaging gameplay? So if we're just talking about having the player press more buttons, then I would argue that what you're actually advocating for is the potential for the tearing down of atmosphere and, as collateral, the overall reduction of fear. Let's really think about this for a second. What is the quickest way to ruin the atmosphere in a horror game? Objectively speaking, the fastest way to kick a player out of their immersion is to introduce some meta concept to the game. For example, throwing a QTE event on the screen and having the player mash a single button for 8 seconds is one way of many. There is nothing more jarring to someone playing a horror game than easing that player into an atmosphere of horror and tension, and then suddenly and forcefully ejecting them from their immersion and reminding them that they're just playing a video game. This is really important, guys. People typically assume that the value of atmosphere is only in creating a sense of something, or in our case, stimulating a sense of fear. But that's only the surface level. You might even see it as just another tool that game developers use, but I like to think of it as a clever facade. To put it simply, an atmosphere isn't about scary sounds or dark rooms. An atmosphere is about how well it can convince you that you aren't playing a game. It stands as the core and most critical prerequisite of a horror game, because otherwise, it's just an adventure game with the occasional startling jump scare. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we're talking about a horror game, not a European coffee commercial. This is why you're walking a really fine line when you attempt to introduce engaging, quote-unquote, player mechanics, and why the games are so amazing when those player mechanics serve to promote the rest of the game rather than tear it down. The most recent example I have of this is the highly rated and very successful Silent Hill 2 remake. Again, for the Downpour fans in the back, I don't hate the game, nor do I think it shouldn't exist or anything like that. The snobs of the series seem to think that the problems I have with that game have only to do with the fact that it's not like the original. And guess what? They're absolutely right, but not for the silly superficial reasons that they think. Let's start off with one that isn't even about combat, but contributes to the overall issues of the game in the same kind of way. So one of the issues I have with that game are the constant reminders of the original. Remember this part? Remember this thing? Remember this game that existed, belongs to an amazing set of games, and Konami refuses to fix and re-release on PC? Yeah, I f***ing remember that game. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I'm trying to play this one. This is not an adequate use of exploration-based gameplay, and it only serves as the worst kind of fan service while also doubling as a way to knock you out of the atmosphere that the game admittedly does a fantastic job of building. Okay, so this is a minor grievance of mine, but it highlights the same kind of atmosphere destruction that I've been referring to throughout this video. And there are more issues that I have with this game, but to be honest, my feelings about Silent Hill 2 Remake are kind of complex and require a lot of thinking through my own ideas. So it's outside of the scope of this video. But if that's something you're interested in, you should let me know in the comments. Maybe we can do something. Anyway, of all the issues I have with Silent Hill 2 Remake, none of them are as grave and unforgivable as the combat. First of all, from a gameplay perspective, if this qualifies as engaging, then your brain would fry if you ever tried to play an actually engaging piece of content. There's more engagement to be found trying to click on random things in a flash game than there is depth to this combat system. No, really. Check this out. This is a free flash game called Hotel 626, and it was developed by Doritos in 2008. Yes, that Doritos. Let's put these games side by side and narrate the variety in their gameplay versus all of the combat in Silent Hill 2 Remake. Let's start with Silent Hill 2 Remake. Hit, hit, spam filter armor activates, dodge, and repeat until it's on the ground, execute. Wow, look at that. So many varying mini games, and it even had a crazy experimental meta concept where you put in your real phone number and a character from the game would call you and tell you which direction to run during a chase sequence. That's sweet. Hit, hit, spam filter armor activates, dodge, hit, hit, execute, or shoot, 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 execute. All right, now do either of these options a minimum of 300 times over the course of 16 hours. Here's an interesting change in the remake that I agree with. What they did to the quad leg mannequins in turning them into ambush predators was fantastic. But even those guys become tedious after a while because they overused the hell out of them. And again, in terms of combat gameplay, there is zero change over the course of the entire game, even with the boss fights. Meanwhile, a company that makes tortilla chips did a better job of being both scary and engaging while promoting new flavors for bags of chips. Get out of my face, you Silent Hill snob. Unlike you, I actually care about this series and want to see it improve. All you care about is wanting to see it become popular so you can argue your headcanon with the other snobs on Reddit. We are not the same. But Laud, the original Silent Hill 2 gameplay was basically the same thing. You're absolutely right, but that isn't a good argument. The original game didn't force you into combat segments to the detriment of its own atmosphere and focus on it to such an arcadey degree that it introduced bad weather as a reason for why there's more aggressive and combative monsters. Something that isn't even an original introduction in the series because that terrible idea was originally implemented in Silent Hill Downpour.
Whoa. Whoa, dude, look at that light. Oh no. Oh no. Can you run? Is this running? This is me running.
And even that game did a better job of it because it wasn't a forced and scripted segment. It happened around the town dynamically. That game also had aimbot mechanics, which at the very least was funny.
Listen, honey, I've had enough.
You don't have to agree with me about this. But if you do disagree, I'd like for you to tell me how the combat in the remake and its emphasis contributes to the atmosphere and helps to promote fear, which again is the primary goal of a horror game. The remake took enemies that you'd be scared to get caught by as you ran past them and turned them into tedious obstacles for you to hit, dodge, hit, execute. Is that really the engaging gameplay you're looking for in a horror game? Or at the very least, are you really willing to sacrifice the overall horror of a game in order to be able to do that for 16 hours There is a correct way to do these things, and we're gonna go with my favorite example in the hopes that you might see what I mean. But first, if you're enjoying my content, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with your homies. I recently got approved for memberships on YouTube, so if you're looking for an easy way to support my content, check that out, and if you do become a member, I'll be sure to shout out all my big thugs at the end of my videos. And let's get back to it. Let's talk about Condemned: Criminal Origins. This game has arguably the greatest horror game opening of all time, and I love it. I love it so much, I'm going to use it to give you a lesson on atmosphere. If you're wondering why, or worse yet, you've never heard of the game before, let me paint you a picture. The year is like 2007, and Lil Boy Laud just got his own Xbox 360. What do you think he does with that thing? If you somehow thought Halo 2, you're goddamn right. But picture Lil Boy Laud walking through the entrance of Walmart and immediately running to the electronics section. I don't care about groceries, mom. I'm trying to get my neck turned staring up at a TV that's 12 feet too high. That's what I'ma do. But in this case, there was already a group of Silent Hill fans, they must have been, taking up all the demo stations. I was walking through and looking at the game displays, and that's where I saw it. This giant eyeball looking thing staring at me, and I wanted to play it real bad, but we was broke, so it wouldn't be another year until I was able to play it at a friend's house. But anyway, I borrowed it from him, got home, grabbed a chilled Sunkist and ran to my room, closed the door, turned off the lights, and turn that motherfucker on. Oh yeah, you know this is gonna be good. The game starts with our main character, Ethan Thomas, rolling up on the scene of a homicide investigation. You're introduced to Detective Dickinson, resident tutorial expert, and a man who must have been a week away from retiring from the force. I liken this tape to like a gateway because of what it seems to do to Thomas. Past this point, it's a claustrophobic and gruesome underworld full of the worst kinds of individuals, and you don't even know it yet. But there are glimpses if you explore a bit. Glimpses of a deteriorating mental state on the part of Thomas, but also a hint of the hornet's nest we somewhat unknowingly have stumbled into. Giant rats, tagged walls, and a dilapidated structure that serves as a habitat for junkies. We come across another character, Officer Decker, the first man on the scene. He leads us to the scene of the crime, and from here, the player is introduced to a serial killer that has seemingly been very active in this world. One who seems to take joy in playing dollhouse with his victims and inanimate mannequins. We're introduced to evidence collecting tools that explore the manner of death, and as we're starting to grasp the seriousness of this moment, Detective Dickinson smells cigar smoke in the air. He tells Officer Decker to put his cigarette out, to which Decker replies, "I don't smoke." The suspect is still here. We follow the smell and catch a glimpse of the suspect going up the fire escape, and as we're planning our next move, the suspect cuts the power out in the building. Our orders are to clear out the building and make our way to the breaker box and turn the power back on. And this is where the atmosphere of the game truly shines.
Agent Thomas, Officer Becker. I don't know if they're on a new drug or... Thomas, Dickinson, there's one coming your way. Addict amped up on something.
Hey, I know you're down here!
Federal agent, come out peacefully or I will use force.
Fuck you!
With this single interaction, Thomas, and by extension the player, have realized that this isn't some random abandoned building, but rather a den of hardened criminals on even harder drugs. These are not civilized people who are going to listen to your law-abiding commands. They aren't monsters either, but when your life is at stake and their footsteps permeate throughout the building, the line blurs and we have a decision to make. It's us or them. The stage has been set, the atmosphere has eased the player into the world, and now, because this game has combat in it, it's imperative that it does it correctly. And dude, does Condemned do it correctly. The majority of this game is full of dynamic sequences due to the unpredictable nature of the enemy AI. You can play this intro a dozen times, and each time you'll have enemies acting differently. The combat isn't complex, but it lacks in depth it has in terms of just how raw it is. This is the kind of world where if you need a weapon, you just rip that motherfucker right off the wall and you start swinging. No time to think, no time to reason, it's kill or be killed. And that is how the combat in this game walks the fine line without tearing down the atmosphere. The enemy AI keeps engagements fresh and prevents combat from being that tedious thing you have to do and turns it into something interesting that you look forward to. The amount of times I've played that game, walking around with a gun and blasting junkies saying things like, "It's a 9mm motherfucker," it brings a smile to my face and makes me want to play it again. So to summarize everything, at the end of the day, horror games require a delicate balance. You can't just toss clashing mechanics into this genre because people who don't understand game development want to push more buttons and expect everything to work out. The core of horror is in the immersion, and nothing breaks that wall down faster than sacrificing a cleverly crafted atmosphere just so that the lowest common denominator of fans can strawman and argue about how it's better than the originals without considering the damage an inclusion like this has to the rest of the game. I'm not saying combat has no place in a horror game. The reason combat works in classics like Condemned and Fatal Frame, or newer iterations of Resident Evil and Dead Space, is because it stays thematically appropriate, keeps it simple, and doesn't overstay its welcome. No matter how scary you might have made your game, the horror will not survive when you turn tense encounters into a repetitive chore. So let's be real. If your combat doesn't serve the rest of the game, it's a distraction at best and turns your game into a joke at worst. Listen, there's a lot to talk about that doesn't quite fit within the scope of this video. So I am planning to make multiple deep dives on different aspects of horror games and what makes them work or not work. But for now, I'm curious to see what you guys think. Make sure to subscribe, become a member if you're feeling extra supportive, and leave a comment with your thoughts about how you would like developers to approach combat in horror games. Thanks for watching and take care. Bye-bye.